Welcome to the Friends of the Earth Ireland System Change webinar series. This aims to facilitate learners to connect the dots between global justice issues and draw out the root causes of injustice and reflect on action pathways, while also amplifying the work being done by groups locally and around the world. Today, we're focusing on gender justice with V'cenza Cirefice. V'cenza is an artist, researcher, and activist from Ireland who explores environmental justice through a feminist lens. She's worked with Young Friends of the Earth Europe, Plan International, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, as well as climate and feminist movements in Ireland. Currently, she's doing a PhD in NUI Galway on resistance to extractivism in the north of Ireland. So I'll now pass over to V'cenza for a presentation, which will follow with the Q&A. Thank you, V'cenza.
Thanks, Evelyn, and hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you this evening. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Hopefully this evening we're going to join the dots a little bit between gender justice and environmental justice. In this short presentation, I'm going to try and cover a little bit about what ecofeminism is, why climate change is a feminist issue, point out that women are on the front lines and some examples of that, talk about feminist solutions and some more examples from around the world. So hopefully we can get through this packed agenda here, but also happy to expand in the Q&A session afterwards. So I suppose ecofeminism is a term that was coined by Francois de Bon in the 70s, but it very much comes from grassroots movements from all around the world, and many movements that maybe wouldn't call themselves ecofeminist in like lots of different countries and contexts. And I suppose ecofeminism just really brings together environmentalism and feminism, and it's really connected to this idea of environmental justice. So I guess we know that environmental justice is about the idea that not everybody contributes the same to the climate crisis or environmental destruction, and not everyone is impacted in the same way as well. It's normally marginalized communities that bear the worst brunt of this crisis. And so ecofeminism is just really bringing a gendered lens to that and a gendered perspective. And I really like this quote from ecofeminist Karen Warren here on the screen. And it's really about drawing the connections between how different marginalized people are treated and how the environment is treated as well. So she says, you know, it's a political movement as well as a theoretical position. And you could add a lot of different oppressed categories to that as well, as she's just touching on some of them there. And I won't go into it too much, but just like feminism or environmentalism, there's lots of different branches and strands of thought within that as well. So if you're interested in the topic, these are kind of the main schools of thought. So you have spiritual ecofeminism, material ecofeminism, feminist political ecology, and queer ecologies. And so, yeah, if you're really interested, I would really recommend diving into those subfields within it and the different debates amongst them as well. But I guess for me, the main points I like to pick out here is that the ecofeminism that I ascribe to is about more than just women. It's about power dynamics and how they operate in society, gender roles and the division of labour within society, and how that's connected to systems as well, which I'm going to try and go into a bit more in depth next. So I guess it's about placing social justice at the heart of the issue and moving away from connecting women to nature from a very biological point of view. And also, I'm really inspired, and I think ecofeminism tries to draw on this idea of intersectionality, which comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe how different identities intersect with each other. And so we know that women are impacted first and worst by climate change, but not all women are the same. So it's good to recognize that their experiences with the environment are also mediated by class and race and ethnicity and so many other factors. So it's good to keep that intersectional approach in mind whenever we're talking about this. And I suppose to get to kind of the roots of the connections that we're talking about this evening, we have to kind of go back in time quite a bit to understand this. And whenever we say, when did the climate crisis start? A lot of people might point to the Industrial Revolution when we started to pump CO2 into the atmosphere. And you can see this graph here, the rising levels of CO2 after the Industrial Revolution. But ecofeminists, along with a lot of critical thinkers, say that we need to go back to the period before this to really understand this in a much deeper way. And we should go back to the time whenever there was this transition from feudalism to capitalism, because that was a really tumultuous time that changed so much about how we relate to each other and the world around us, and has huge insights for what we're talking about now. So we're talking about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment period as well. It was a time of hugely changing ecological and social relationships. And during this time, we really see the creation of a new way of thinking about the world and a new worldview coming in, which sees the environment as moving from being a living being to being just a dead resource that we can extract profit from. So nature becomes separate from society. This worldview also sets up a lot of other binaries, and I'm going to try and explain that in this graph now. It sets up this kind of dualism between a passive nature and an active culture. So one side of this graph or table is the valued side with agency, and then the other side is devalued and seen as the other and seen as passive. And so it extends to lots of different categories, and I'm sure we could add a lot more onto there. But basically, whenever we create another, and the environment becomes the other, and certain groups of people based on class and gender and race become the other as well. And that category, or those people or that environment, are much easier then to objectify and to exploit and to marginalize and dehumanize as well. So we see this worldview then being used to justify colonialism and colonial expansion around the world, and to really sort of dehumanize huge amounts of people all over the world. And I suppose ecofeminists have pointed out that this thinking and this worldview is very much the root of our current crises, ecological and social crises, and it's really the root of systems of oppression like capitalism, like colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And then I suppose I just wanted to highlight, these are some amazing books that are trying to bring back what our worldview was before this dualistic worldview that separates us from nature. And I really recommend looking into these fabulous books, because they really talk about how in Ireland, there was a much more relational way of relating to the world and each other and the environment before this sort of rupture in nature and society. And then I just want to recommend another book called CALIBAN and the Witch by Silvia Federici. She's an amazing ecofeminist, and she really adds to these debates, about this time in history when we see nature become separate to us by adding in the gendered element. And she talks about how it wasn't just a time where we see our relationship to nature changing, but the way we see gender roles in society changing hugely as well. And she talks about how there was this period of about 200 to 300 years of the witch hunts, which was really a crackdown on women's freedom and a time of disciplining women, because this was needed to break female solidarity and to force women to do into the home, to carry out the care work for free to prop up the capitalist system, but also to create the labour through their reproductive labour. And so it's also a time whenever this idea of reproductive justice becomes really central, because we're starting to treat women's bodies like a commodity, and there's a huge crackdown on abortion access as well at this time. And so for me, that's why reproductive justice is such an important part of the story of climate justice. And reproduction is really related to this idea of care work. So all of the things, social reproduction is all of the things that people do to sustain society and to create well-being for society. So the life-sustaining practices really, and that's like cooking, cleaning, caring for elderly, caring for children, all of those things, education, healthcare, all of those things. And so what I would say is reproductive justice needs to go outside just abortion access and include the rights to housing, clean environment, and economic and social well-being as well in a much broader way. And there's also a school of thought called ecofeminist economics, which is really important because it highlights how the environment, as well as women's labour, is externalized and invisibilized under our current economic system. And so we need to start to truly value that, because capitalism is quite contradictory, because it's also destroying that thing that is actually propping it up and sustaining it. And this is just an article that we wrote back in 2017 during the repeal movement in Ireland, that I would also recommend checking out. So yeah, next I'd like to just touch on briefly why climate change is a feminist issue. And that's really because it disproportionately affects women around the world. And I think it's important to say that that's not because of some biological vulnerability, but because of the structural inequalities that are built into the system that we have and that we live in, the capitalist patriarchy. So women are more likely to live in poverty, they're paid less, they're doing care work as well, which puts them in closer contact with the environment. So there's this material link there. So if women are collecting the firewood or water or doing most of the cooking and cleaning, they're much more likely going to be impacted whenever the environment gets degraded. And they also have, limited access to resources, like you can see here in these figures, less access to justice, maybe limited mobility, and a limited voice in shaping decisions in a lot of contexts as well. Just like to point out as well that women and LGBT plus people are actually more likely to die in environmental disasters as well. And that's often due to cultural and societal reasons. For example, in tsunamis, maybe sometimes in different cultures, women aren't taught to swim, or maybe they fear to leave the house because of the threat of sexual violence in shelters and so on. So there's lots of factors there, like gendered factors, to think about when we're thinking about all of these things. As well, we know migration is a gendered process. And ecofeminists as well have pointed out that it's, not just about women, but it's about gender roles and how they're constructed in society. And this idea of toxic masculinity as well has been studied for connection to meat consumption, militarism, overconsumption, and environmentalism, and how environmentalism becomes feminized, as seen as a feminine thing to do. And toxic masculinity is an element of patriarchy, which also hurts men as well. So extractivism is one of my research areas, and it's quite a big word. And sometimes when you think about extractivism, you might think about mining or fracking or oil and gas pipelines. But I think from an ecofeminist perspective, we understand extractivism to be much more than that. It's actually a way of looking at the world and acting in the world, and it's connected to that dualistic way of looking at the world that we talked about earlier. So I love this quote from Naomi Klein, where she talks about how extractivism is about reducing life and complex systems into like parts and just a mountain into a dead resource to extract from. But she also points out, you know, that we extract from human beings as well, and we turn certain communities into sacrifice zones as well as certain places. And I'm really inspired by Indigenous feminists, like Leanne Simpson here, who says that the opposite to this is deep reciprocity, it's respect, it's relationship, it's responsibility, and it's local. And I think that that's such a beautiful quote to this. And I just like to highlight some campaigns by Indigenous feminists and activists across the US, in particular in Canada, that link this idea of sexual violence to extraction zones, and they talk about, you know, the parallels and how their women's bodies are treated and how the earth is treated as well. And this is so deeply tied to colonialism. So Indigenous women are facing this like triple threat. And yeah, this is a quote from Melina Massimo, whose own sister is one of the many missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada. And making the link between this idea of colonialism and how it treats the land, capitalism, how it treats land, but also how it devalues and dehumanizes Indigenous women as well. And connected to this, I'm part of an artist collective called Extracting Us, who've had 2 exhibitions recently that you can find at Extracting Us or Despite Extractivism. And these exhibitions are really about bringing a feminist lens to the idea of extractivism, because whenever we think about extractivism, sometimes we think about big, empty, vast landscapes like an open pit mine, or looking down from a bird's eye view at a fracking site or something like that. But a feminist perspective would very much say that we need to focus as well on the everyday lived realities and the peoples who actually live in these areas, and all of the ways that they're resisting and persisting despite extractivism. So Despite Extractivism is our latest exhibition, and these are just some of the contributors from all around the world who are highlighting the ways that communities continue to care and be creative and live together and resist extractivism. So if you're interested, please check that out. We also had a series of webinars as well, which you can find on the website of Despite Extractivism, on these different feminist themes of embodiment, community, worlding as well. And I suppose next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that women aren't just, you know, passive victims in this story, but very much are on the front lines of the resistance as well. And these are just some statistics, you know, that show very much how much women, especially women in the global south, are part of the grassroots resistance movements against the climate crisis. And this was a webinar that we were involved in through the Galway Feminist Collective and Friends of the Earth Ireland, that you can watch the recording of to hear the voices from some amazing women who are doing amazing things in Guatemala and Kenya. And I also just wanted to flag this project I was involved in with WeCan, which is a database of all of the different case studies and stories from around the world of women and feminist solutions to the climate crisis. And there's all these different categories that you can click into and read lots of different articles and watch videos on as well. And I just wanted to say as well that, you know, women are really standing up and resisting, but not in some kind of essentialist way. Like, we're not trying to say that women are always naturally more caring about the environment. It's more to do with, you know, the gendered division of labour that I touched on earlier. So because there's a material impact with women around the world doing all of the care work, really. So it's often women who are first to notice when the water becomes poisoned or the land contaminated or the air toxic. And so often this is, I think, why, because of this material link, women are standing up and speaking out, because the system is disadvantaging them as well. And I just wanted to highlight, that female earth defenders, and particularly Indigenous women, are facing huge amounts of violence around the world. And just yesterday was the 6th anniversary of Berta Cáceres's anniversary, and she was murdered for her resistance against a hydropower project. This is just one of the quotes that she had said, which really talks about this other way of looking and relating to the world that I think that we really need to try and recover and uncover to move forward. I also just wanted to talk about the misogyny of women standing up and speaking out as well in public spaces, and we see that around Greta Thunberg, but also all of the other activists that stand up and talk out. Often it's said that they're mentally ill or they're too loud, all of the things that have been used to silence women, for many, many years. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this, because I know you've heard already some really interesting things about feminist Green New Deal, but I just wanted to touch on the idea that, if we're going to talk about building back better, it's so important that we centre this idea of care work and social reproduction in our vision for climate justice and a feminist green recovery from COVID as well. And these are definitely areas I think we need to revalue as a society, because they're the life-sustaining activities that boost community well-being, and they're also low-carbon jobs. And we've seen before that the Green New Deal might have emphasised maybe construction or tech and energy jobs. And these images are from a Green New Deal campaign, which are very gendered. You can see the woman looking after the kid here and the man with the hard hat. And I suppose a eco-feminist critique would be to sort of try and challenge that a little bit, and who does what in society and what the economy is for, really. So just to touch on a few feminist approaches to the climate crisis, I think feminists have been really instrumental in bringing really important debates to this whole discussion. And I think one of those is that, technocratic or very scientific or techno-fix ideas to the climate crisis don't consider the inequality that's built into the system already there. So they're not going to be, they're kind of like false solutions in a way, because they're not dealing with the social justice elements. So to give an example of that, if we have geoengineering or sucking the carbon from the air, if it's relying on a technology that might not even exist yet, it's also very colonial and patriarchal, because it's still about seeing the environment as out there as something that needs to be fixed and controlled and dominated, and sort of, conquered in a way. And that's, the worldview that got us into the situation. So it's not going to be the worldview that gets us out of it as well. So we need to really challenge power dynamics in society, and also to value other ways of knowing and knowledge systems, whether that's storytelling or Indigenous knowledge or ancestral knowledge. All of these things need to be part of the equation as well. And this idea of a systemic approach is so important as well, because we know it's not just individuals that need to change, but it's very much the system. And if we take the example, that if we just add more female CEOs to fossil fuel companies or mining companies, but the company continues to be structured around the need for constant growth, with all of the environmental and human rights abuses that go along with that, then that's not a real solution. And as well, if we see climate change as just a technical issue, we're just going to swap one energy system for another that doesn't address the inequalities that are built into the system, like energy poverty. And it's such a gendered thing, which I know you've heard about in the other webinar. And so, yeah, just to sum that up, I think that a feminist Green New Deal would take a really holistic understanding to climate change, recognize that social justice has to be at the heart of this, and that means housing rights, ending gender-based violence, healthcare, childcare, reproductive justice are all central. And this is just a slide from We Do, who do amazing work on a global feminist Green New Deal. And just before I finish, I just wanted to share with you some amazing examples from around the world, and maybe some ideas for you to look into yourself as well. So I just wanted to highlight the work of Vandana Shiva and Bina Agarwal for their amazing contributions to ecofeminism and feminist political ecology. And I wanted to highlight the amazing women that I get to work with in the Sperrins, who are resisting mining projects at the minute. And this is the woman meeting Berta Cáceres's daughter here. And this is really important because Ireland is really facing a mining boom at the minute. It's really part of this European mining boom. And in response to this, we've set up, there's a group called CAIM, which is Communities Against the Injustice of Mining. And there's so many amazing and strong women. There's people of all genders involved, but it's great to see so many women standing up and speaking out on this issue across Ireland. And I welcome you to follow us on Twitter or social media. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Zapatistas from Chiapas in Mexico, who were over in Ireland in October and came up to visit the site in the Sperrins, where the Canadian gold mining company is trying to open a gold mine in solidarity. And it was a group of young women, and it was so inspirational to hear from them. And as part of the Galway Feminist Collective, there's this amazing podcast where you can hear more about their movement, and there's a whole episode on the women's movement in that as well. And I also recommend to follow the Galway Feminist Collective because they do a lot of work around environmentalism and feminism. This is another resistance against gold mining, which was a peaceful struggle led by women as well, which was very important and inspirational story. And these are women in Bosnia and Herzegovina who protested against a hydropower plant along their river, and were able to stop the project by blocking a bridge for 500 days. And then there's the Dublin Ecofeminist for anyone in Ireland and Dublin that would like to get involved. They're doing great things. And also Women, which is African Women Unite Against Destructive Resource Extraction, who are doing amazing ecofeminist things throughout Africa. And they have this beautiful film, which I welcome you to go and look at in your own time as well. Also, the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty and seed sovereignty and water protection across the Americas. There's Leona LaDuke who set up Honor the Earth, which is an amazing organization to follow. And as well, the Wet'suwet'en resistance movement, which was really important. They're trying to block an oil pipeline being built across their unceded territory. So it's territory that they've never given up or created any treaties with any government over. And they've been violently evicted from their protest camps, but there's a very strong gendered element to this because so many Indigenous women have gone missing or been murdered across their territories, and they often connect this to the construction of these projects. And this is the matriarch here resisting the eviction, and you can see here that they hang these red dresses to symbolize the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I thought it was quite symbolic. Here you see them being taken down. And then finally, I just wanted to share with you an amazing project by the Tiny House Warriors, who are resisting pipelines by building tiny houses in the path of the pipelines, and in the process combining upskilling female activists, but also dealing with the housing crisis that they're facing as well in their communities. And I have a short video which I'm hoping I can play for you.
I'm here in my home community of Nisgalinth in Secwepemc territory. We're going to be putting these tiny houses on the direct path of the Trans Mountain Kinder Morgan pipeline within our Secwepemc territory. And our goal is to help solve some of the housing crisis that our people in our Indigenous communities are facing. At the same time, protecting our water, protecting our salmon, and asserting our jurisdiction and authority over our own unceded territories. We never signed treaties here, so our territory is around the size of the UK. 518 kilometers of the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline proposes to go through Secwepemc Nation. We're talking about archaeological remain areas, we're talking about ancestral burial sites, we're talking about traditional villages of the Secwepemc where you will see like hundreds of the traditional pit house depressions. These are along the pipeline route, and it's a part of who we are and our identity. And as we say, as a Secwepemc, it's the blood and bones of our ancestors that make up the soil that we're standing on. We had a young girl pass away in Kamloops this past winter because she didn't have a home and she died of exposure, a young woman. And we don't want to see that happen again this winter. We want to be able to have 10 tiny houses on this pipeline route and be able to offer people in our nation that don't have homes to be able to be in some of these really pristine, spiritually significant areas that we want to occupy and reestablish our village sites in. We are hoping with building these 10 tiny homes that we are going to create a momentum with the community, Indigenous people, and all of BC and Canada to stand behind Indigenous people asserting their rights to their land. So we're calling on everybody to help and join with this tiny house warrior movement.
Thank you, Evelyn. I'll just share my screen, and we're almost at the end. Finish up here. Great. So I guess, yeah, I really love this video because it really sums up, you know, the connecting all of these issues that we're talking about. You know, it's so much more than the carbon in the air. It's to do with all of these issues. And it's really about, you know, at the end of the day, relationships between each other and the land and the more than human world that we cohabit with. And yeah, I just directed to a few resources that are going to go up as well on the website. You can explore more podcasts there and different readings and some other examples from around the world, because there's way too many to mention in this presentation.
Thank you so much to V'cenza for giving such a thorough presentation, so condensed. I know it's going to be just a fantastic resource to have. And thank you to everyone on the call for coming and for speaking and for putting things in the chat and for joining us here. And have a lovely evening. Have a lovely Friday night.